Welcome to the 40th annual East Bay Leadership Series presented by Kaiser Permanente. My name is Mark Orcutt, and I am proud to serve as the President and CEO of the East Bay Leadership Council. This year's series has been educational and galvanizing for our members in a number of ways, and we're excited to close today with a timely conversation on global politics and what it means for leadership and outcomes here in the East Bay. We are honored to be joined by Secretary Leon Panetta, one of the most experienced and respected public servants in modern American history. Following his remarks, we'll move into a moderated Q&A with Dr. Daniel Sargent of UC Berkeley's Institute of International Studies. For those new to EBLC, we are an employer-led nonprofit organization on a mission to strengthen the economy and improve quality of life in the East Bay. We do that through policy advocacy, innovative programs, and convenings like this one. Our members represent nearly 50,000 jobs and more than 60 billion in economic impact. I'm proud of those numbers on the screen and clear-eyed that we still have work to do to ensure our membership reflects the full diversity and strength of our region. That commitment extends to our policy work, which is shaped by our members and community partners like you all. To make it easier to shape our policy advocacy priorities, we've launched a policy intake form. You can scan a QR code on the screen. It probably won't be up long. We'll also drop a link in the chat, or you can visit our website at the eastbayleadershipcouncil.com. This will help you share legislation or policy issues that you want our organization to consider for engagement. Looking ahead, just later this week, Friday, May 8th, we're co-hosting a candidate forum for the Contra Costa County Superintendent of Schools, a critical role for our region's education system. You can again register with the QR code, link in the chat, or visit eastbayleadershipcouncil.com. Now, a few thank yous to the sponsors who make this series and so much of our work possible. First, our presenting sponsor, Kaiser Permanente. Thank you for your ongoing support of the series and the Council's work. We're also grateful for our three major sponsors, Chevron, AssetMark, and the Martinez Refining Company, as well as our sustaining sponsors, Marathon and CSAA Insurance Group, and our contributing sponsors, the California Apartment Association, Contra Costa Association of Realtors, Contra Costa Water District, Cox Castle, Equitify, Hacienda, Hanson Bridget, IBEW Local 302, John Muir Health, Pacific Gas and Electric, Phillips 66, Sutter Health, the Workforce Development Board of Contra Costa County, Visit Walnut Creek, and the Pacific Service Credit Union. I can take a breath now. Thank you for all of those sponsors for their support of our work. We also appreciate the individuals supporting this series through our community leader sponsorship. Their names will also appear on the screen now. Okay, so before I introduce Secretary Panetta, one quick note, please submit questions for today's session using the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar, not the chat. It makes it much easier for us to queue questions efficiently. So thank you for your help in that regard. Okay, here we go. I am pleased to introduce today's featured speaker, Secretary Leon Panetta. A Monterey native and former U.S. Army intelligence officer, Secretary Panetta has spent more than 5 decades in public service. He served 16 years in Congress, representing California's Central Coast, including as chair of the House Budget Committee, before leading the Office of Management and Budget and serving as White House Chief of Staff under President Bill Clinton. He later returned to public service as director of the CIA, where he oversaw the operation that brought Osama bin Laden to justice, and as Secretary of Defense, where he guided U.S. strategy during a period of significant global change. In 1997, he co-founded the Panetta Institute for Public Policy with his wife, Sylvia, where he continues to prepare future leaders for the challenges of public service. Please join me in welcoming Secretary Leon Panetta. Take it away, Secretary.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, Mark. And it's an honor for me to have the opportunity to be able to speak to all of you that are part of the East Bay Leadership Council. I want to pay tribute to all of you because you represent in many ways the heart and soul of both Contra Costa and Alameda counties. I really believe that groups like this that are able to come together to work together are the strength of our democracy and really represent the very best, particularly in challenging times like we have today. I'm honored to be here, first of all, because my family has had ties to the East Bay. My wife Sylvia, who's also Italian, had a number of cousins who lived both in Alameda County as well as Contra Costa County, and so we had a close relationship with them during the time that Sylvia and I were living on the West Coast. We also have our son Jimmy, who's a member of Congress, represents the district that I represented here on the Central Coast. Jimmy began his legal career at the Alameda DA's office. His wife, Carrie, was also in the DA's office and became a Superior Court judge in Alameda County and is now a Superior Court judge here in Monterey County. And I also had the chance to serve on the board of Blue Shield, California, which has its headquarters, as many of you know, in downtown Oakland. In addition to that, something I just mentioned to Mark is that when I was in Congress, I lived in a house owned by George Miller, who represented Contra Costa. And there were four of us that lived in that house during the time that we were in Congress and developed a great relationship. And I learned a great deal about a lot of the issues that all of you are confronting in your part of the world. I'm really proud to speak to a group that represents a very important part of California. And I'm a proud Californian. I was born and raised in California. I'm the son of Italian immigrants. My parents, like millions of others, came to this country in the early 30s. My dad was the 16th in his family. He had several brothers who came over ahead of him, as was the tradition. When my mother and father came here, the tradition is that you visit your older brother first. And he had an older brother, Bruno, who was living in Sheridan, Wyoming. And he had another brother, Tony, who was here in California. They spent one winter in Sheridan, Wyoming, and my mother said to my father that it was time to visit his other brother in California. Thank God they made that decision. They wound up in Monterey. My dad ran a restaurant business during the war years in downtown Monterey on Alvarado Street. Some of you may know that period. It was a jump in time in Monterey. We were catching lots of sardines. We had Cannery Row developed, Steinbeck's Cannery Row. That was, at the peak during those years. But we also had Fort Ord, a military reservation, which was training young men for the battlefields of World War II. And their last stop with civilization was downtown Monterey. My earliest recollections were standing on a chair in the back of my father's restaurant, washing glasses in that restaurant. My parents believed child labor was a requirement in our family. When my dad sold the restaurant after the war, he bought some land in Carmel Valley and planted a walnut orchard. And again, my brother and I worked in that walnut orchard. As those trees grew older, my dad used to go around with a pole and hook and shake each of the branches, and my brother and I used to be underneath collecting the walnuts. When I got elected to Congress, my father said to me that I'd been well trained to go back to Washington because I'd been dodging nuts all my life, which was true. I used to ask my dad, why did he come all of that distance to come to a strange land? They came from a poor area in Italy, but they had the comfort of family and friends. I've been there. Why would you leave all of that to come to a strange country? I've never forgotten my father's response. He said, your mother and I believed we could give our children a better life in this country. And that, as we all know, is the American dream. It's what we want for our children and hopefully what they will want for their children as well. I've had the chance to live that dream as the son of Italian immigrants. And in many ways, what the East Bay leadership is all about is making sure that others have the same chance to be able to succeed at the American dream and to have a better life, I don't have to remind all of you that we live at challenging times. This is obviously a very challenging time for our democracy. We're testing our democratic institutions, we're testing our democracy, and we're testing, in many ways, the American dream. We do a poll here at the Panetta Institute every year that goes out and asks college students across the country questions about our political process issues and other things. And we just got the results back that we were looking at the other day. 78%, I've never seen this number before in any poll we've taken. 78% of those polled said that they were not going to be able to enjoy a better life than their parents. In other words, that they were not going to be able to enjoy the American dream. And that raises a lot of concerns, obviously. And it tells us what a pivotal time we live in. I think our country can take one of two paths in the 21st century. We can either be an America in Renaissance in the 21st century, or we could be an America in decline. I honestly believe we could be an American Renaissance. Our economy is strong. The fundamentals in our economy are strong. We have tremendous creativity and innovation, tremendous resilience. We see that not just in Silicon Valley, but we see it in your area as well. That there really is, a strong ability to make our economy successful and to be on the cutting edge of the future. And I think, we could be in America that competes in a global world. I'm not a believer that somehow we shouldn't be out there competing. We should be, and we should be enjoying free and fair trade in the world because we live in a global world, whether we like it or not. It is a global world. That we could also teach our young people the skills they'll need in the 21st century. I'm not a believer that young people are suddenly not going to have opportunity. Every time we invent something, there is the opportunity for new jobs in our economy, and I believe that. But we have to teach them the skills of the 21st century. And in addition to that, I think we could be a country where Republicans and Democrats learn to work together, to govern together. That's what makes our democracy strong. I've had the opportunity in my political career to have seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. The good news is I saw Washington work. Republicans and Democrats working together. When I got out of the Army, I went back to the Senate as a legislative assistant to Tom Kuechel. Some of you may remember Tom Kuechel. He was a U.S. Senator from California, Republican. But Tom Kuechel came out of the Hiram Johnson tradition in California and was the minority whip under Everett Dirksen. And they worked together with Democrats at that time on major legislation. When I got elected to Congress, Tip O'Neill was the speaker, a Democrat from Boston. But he had a great relationship with a guy named Bob Michel, who was the minority leader. Did they have their political differences? Of course. And did they confront each other in elections? Yes. But both of them believed that when it came to big issues, we had to work together, Republicans and Democrats. That's the Washington that I became very much a part of. And it was great to have that camaraderie, that ability to work with others. And I think it was during the Reagan administration, we worked together. We worked together on immigration reform. We passed immigration reform with a bipartisan vote. I was part of those negotiations. We passed Social Security reform, third rail of politics, but we were able to work together and pass on a bipartisan basis Social Security reform that kept Social Security in business for another 50 years. Right now, Social Security is in trouble. In addition to that, we passed tax reform. In addition to that, I was chair of the House Budget Committee. We worked together to implement fiscal reform. We passed agreements that reduced the deficit. It was bipartisan, $250 billion in spending savings, $250 billion in new revenues. We passed it with a bipartisan vote. When I was director of OMB in the Clinton administration, we did the same thing, $500 billion in deficit reduction. Passing those two agreements helped produce a balanced budget. Not only balanced, but we had a surplus. So we were able to work together to do good things for the country. And I think we can do it again. And we can be strong world leaders in a very dangerous world. We could have that kind of America. But we could also be an America in decline. If we allow our fears and our hates and our divisions, if we allow partisanship to overwhelm the ability to govern, then we'll go the way of past empires because of failed leadership, What'll determine what path we take? It's the quality of leadership that we have. I often tell the students here at the Panetta Institute that in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to make tough decisions, and mark my word, for all of you in business, for all of you in political office, you know it takes tough decisions, sometimes offending members of your own party. But if you make those decisions because you think it's right for the country, right for your community, then we can avoid crisis. But if that leadership is not there, then we will largely govern by crisis. And for the last 20 years in Washington, I think the reality is that we've been governing by crisis. And so it is absolutely critical that if we are to ultimately strengthen our democracy, strengthen our institutions, strengthen our ability to govern and to lead, that we need strong leadership. We need strong leadership here at home. I'm often asked, what is the greatest threat to our national security? And people are surprised by the answer. But I think the greatest threat to our security is a dysfunctional Washington. And right now, because we are not getting the leadership from the president or the leadership from either of the parties in the Congress, there's an inability to work together, an inability to really address the issues that are important in our country, whether it's comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's healthcare, whether it's trying to develop better fiscal reform. I mean, my God, we now have a national debt of almost $40 trillion. We're paying more on interest than we pay on the defense budget because of what's going on and the failure to deal with that. So it's critical that we have that kind of leadership here at home. I also think it's important to have leadership abroad. to be a world leader. For 80 years since World War II, whether it's been a Democratic president or a Republican president, they've had their political differences. But when it came to foreign affairs, they shared the same principles. They believed that America had to be a world leader. Coming out of World War II, we have always believed that America had to lead in the world because of our democratic values, because of our strength. We had to be a leader. Secondly, that we had to build strong alliances. Harry Truman helped put together NATO, the strongest alliance we've had, where we pulled together with European countries to protect Europe from communist Russia at that time. And we did it successfully. We need strong alliances if we're going to deal with a dangerous world. In addition to that, we believed that we had to maintain a strong military power. We didn't do what we did after World War I and dissolve our military. We maintained a strong military, and that was important to our leadership in the world. And we believed in strong diplomacy as well, that we had to have good diplomats, be able to negotiate, and that our presidents were willing to stand up to tyrants in the world. Whether they were Republican or Democrat, they stood up to tyrants. The problem right now is the president, in many ways, has walked away from a lot of those principles. On world leadership, rather than exerting the kind of strong world leadership that's necessary, America is operating alone. We've lost a lot of credibility with our allies in the world. President's threatening to get out of NATO, which is outrageous. I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think Congress would ever approve that. But he's threatened to do that. And you can imagine what kind of signal that sends our allies about the credibility and trust of America. And when it comes to military power, we have to be wise in how we use military power. One of my most awesome responsibilities as Secretary of Defense was deploying our young men and women in uniform into harm's way. And I thought it was very important that when we do that, we need a clear objective. What's the objective? What are we trying to achieve? What's the strategy to achieve that objective? And what's the end game? When can we bring those forces back home? That's important if we're going to take our young men and women and put them in harm's way. So that brings us to the war in Iran. In the war in Iran, the president made a decision to attack. And it was largely based on Netanyahu telling him that they had intelligence as to where the leadership was located in Iran. And that if they targeted that leadership, that within a few days, the regime would come down. By the way, United States intelligence did not support that. They said there's no way that that's going to happen. But the president decided to attack, and we did. We went after the leadership, but the regime did not come down. The regime, if anything, has become more entrenched and more hardline in Iran. And so the president, having not achieved the objective of regime change, then began to develop all kinds of other arguments for why we were at war in Iran. He said there was an imminent threat from Iran, but intelligence again made clear that was not the case, that we were concerned about the Israelis going in and attacking, and therefore others responding by going after our own bases. There were other arguments as well that the president used. And so bottom line was the objective was never very clear. about what we were going to achieve. We did have military objectives. I do think we were able to achieve a lot of those military objectives. We went after their nuclear capability. We went after missiles capability, drone capability, their headquarters. I think we did a lot to weaken Iran. But it's also clear that Iran and the regime were resilient in being able to survive and maintain some of their missile capability and respond back. The president said it would be a short war, I think 6 or 8 weeks. It was clear that at that point, both sides, to some extent, were exhausted. And that's why they agreed on a ceasefire. But in the meantime, the Iranians also did something that should have been expected, which is closing the Straits of Hormuz. I've been in the National Security Council meetings where we were talking about a possible conflict with Iran. One of the first things that was presented was the fact that they would close the Straits of Hormuz. And we had plans to open up the Straits of Hormuz if that happened. The president should not have been surprised by that decision to close the Straits of Hormuz, but he was. And so we are now in a ceasefire. We're really in a stalemate in which both sides, I think in some ways, believe that they're the strong player, that the other side is a paper tiger, and that ultimately the other side will blink. And so there are two issues. How do we open the Straits of Hormuz? And how do we deal with the nuclear threat in Iran? And up to this point, frankly, I don't know that we're that close in resolving either issue. And that raises a concern. I mean, I do think that ultimately the United States should have been prepared to open the Straits of Hormuz, militarily if necessary. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen. And now we're struggling to try to determine how we can reduce that impact, because Iran has leverage over the United States, make no mistake about it. They're impacting our economy, they're impacting on fuel prices, they're impacting on the world economy. The IMF says that if this continues, we could very well have a worldwide recession. So the issue now is, will we be able to see some kind of agreement on these two issues that will allow us to end the war? We may get there, but I tell you this, that because we're dealing with a regime that's hardline, whatever deal we make cannot be trusted. And so I'm not sure what the ultimate end game is going to look like here. I think in the end, frankly, that we will probably see a repeat of what's happened for almost 80 years in the Middle East, that somehow an aggressor is defeated only to come back within a few years and create another war. I think ultimately with this regime, the likelihood is that no matter what kind of deal we make now, I think within 4 to 5 years, there's a good chance we will be at war again. We're also dealing with the war in Ukraine. And I think we need to support defeating Putin. Putin invaded a sovereign democracy. And we need to stand up to Putin, not cater to him, stand up to him. This president needs to stand up to Putin and make clear that he will not succeed in Ukraine. God bless the Ukrainians. They have fought bravely. They have fought viciously. And to a large extent, they are now showing the world that they can stand up to Russia. We ought to be supporting them. And ultimately with China, I think we've got to be strong as well. The president's going to visit Xi in a few weeks. He's not in a strong position to deal with Xi. But my hope is that ultimately, if we are strong at that meeting, that will be able to hopefully improve our relationship with China in the future. Look, we live in a dangerous world. We're dealing with an axis of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran working together. We've got to deal with that. I believe in American leadership. We've come through an awful lot in our country's history. We've been through a civil war. We've been through world wars. We've been through recessions, depressions. We've been through natural disasters. And somehow we've always found the leadership to be able to make our democracy not only deal with those challenges, but become stronger. And I think we will again. Why? Because the strength of our country doesn't lie in Washington. It lies in our communities, in the East Bay leadership community, in my community, and in communities across this country. That's where the real strength is of America, in the spirit and resilience of the American people. I've seen that spirit. When I deploy young men and women into uniform, and I deployed them to areas of danger, I went there, I looked into their eyes, and here were young men and women who were willing to fight and die for their country. If there are those young men and women who are willing to fight and die for their country, surely our elected leaders can have a little bit of that strength to be able to govern our democracy. So in the end, it's we the people. And it's your group and people across this country that have to be willing to exercise our check and balance, our ability to vote, and to make sure that we elect the kind of leadership we need in our democracy to protect the American dream, to give us an American Renaissance, and protect a government of, by, and for all people. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Secretary. I have so many questions that won't surprise our organization and our guests today. But that's not my role today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Daniel Sargent, an associate professor at the University of California, where he's jointly appointed in the Department of History, the Goldman School of Public Policy, and co-director of the Institute of International Studies. He is also the author of a book entitled A Superpower Transformed, the Remaking of American Foreign Relations in the 1970s. I think his most important title today, though, is moderator. So, Dr. Sargent, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Secretary Panetta, for those stirring, powerful remarks. I'd like to start out with a question that I hope might take you right back to the beginning of your political career. Way back when you were a Republican, President Nixon appointed you to direct the Office of Civil Rights. In that role, you insisted on the robust enforcement of federal civil rights law, despite President Nixon's political interest in appeasing white voters resentful of civil rights. That experience, I might suggest, gives us a powerful example of what you have called leadership, and I'd like to salute that. But in this instance, your leadership, I will note, also cost you your job. But I'd like to invite you today to reflect upon the ways in which our commitment over the past half century to civil rights, a commitment that you've really exemplified, has helped to revitalize and strengthen American leadership in the world.
Yeah, I think it was Steve Miller, who was in the administration, who told the CNN moderator that America's role in the world is about power. Mm-hmm. It's not about protecting our values. He couldn't be more mistaken, because our strength is obviously in our military power, but it's also in our values and who we are. And the fact that we respect one another, the fact that, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the revolution, The Declaration of Independence makes clear what our values are, that we're created equal, that we're entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are our values. Our freedoms are our values. Our rights are our values. The rule of law is one of our values. Those are all important to who we are as Americans. And in many ways, you know, we know that when our forefathers sat down, this was a country that wanted to maintain slavery. Mm-hmm. But we also wound up fighting a civil war over that issue. And then we had to come back again after the South fell back into a segregated situation. We then had the civil rights movements in this country, and we produced civil rights laws in the Congress on a bipartisan basis, by the way. Republicans and Democrats working together produced the civil rights laws at the time. Everett Dirksen, minority leader, worked with Lyndon Johnson in producing civil rights. And we passed it and we enforced those laws. One of my responsibilities as director of the Office for Civil Rights was to enforce the law to promote equal education among kids. The South was divided by segregation. There were black schools and there were white schools. And so our responsibility was to take action to try to desegregate those schools. It was not easy. It's tough. It was tough. But it tested leadership, and a lot of people stood up and did what was right because they really felt that segregation was wrong. And that was a fight we all went through as a country. And the reality is that we now see, blacks, white children, children of other racial backgrounds, all coming together in colleges, in universities, in business, in our lives here in America. We're a better country for what we've been through. We're a better country. And to walk away from that responsibility, to weaken the civil rights laws. I mean, the Supreme Court just weakened the Voting Rights Act. To weaken those laws, basically, again, weakens our values, And we send a message to the world then that the United States of America does not represent democratic values, does not represent everyone being treated equally, equal justice. And that's what I'm concerned about right now, is that in addition to all of the other things I talked about, that in fact we're beginning to weaken the rule of law, which is essential to our ability to have a strong democracy.
Absolutely. The quality of our leadership in the world really depends upon the integrity of our commitment to equal rights and equal justice at home. But I wonder if I could pivot towards the economic foundations of American power. You emphasized in your remarks that interest payments on the U.S. national debt have exploded in recent years. They recently surpassed more than $1 trillion a year, which is more than the United States spends on national defense. You really have a unique perspective on this predicament. I don't believe that anybody else in the history of the United States has served as chair of the House Budget Committee, as director of the Office of Management and the Budget, and as Secretary of Defense. So can you help us to understand how severe are the fiscal constraints on American power right now?
This is a crisis that, very frankly, not enough people are paying attention to. The reality is, as I said in my remarks, we are now in the deepest debt we've been in as a country, even going back to World War II. We have a $40 trillion national debt. And neither party, the tragedy is neither party wants to deal with that. We have a president that doesn't want to deal with that. But neither party wants to deal with that as well. Now, they'll all talk about fiscal responsibility. They'll all talk about being tough. But the fact is, they've taken no step to do that. I mean, I was chair of the budget committee. We passed budget resolutions when I was chair. They haven't passed a budget resolution in 20 years in the Congress, 20 years. And rather than taking steps to fiscal reform, they can't even pass the appropriations bills on time, which are supposed to be passed by October 1. And so what do? They pass a CR to temporarily fund the government. But as we've seen in the last number of years, that's a prescription for shutting down the federal government. We just completed the longest shutdown we've ever had in the federal government. When you shut down the federal government, that means that Congress is irresponsible in its duty to do what's necessary in maintaining fiscal responsibility. And the problem is, and I know people often say, well, what's $40 trillion? Somehow we're still able to have a strong economy, strong market. But the problem is that we have to sell that debt. We've got to be able to borrow money from other countries who buy our bonds. And they're not going to buy our bonds unless we provide attractive interest rates. And interest rates on our debt has gone up. We're not only paying, I think right now we are paying in excess of almost $1 trillion to $2 trillion on interest on the debt right now. That means we don't have resources for education, for housing, for healthcare, for other areas that are important to our country, for defense. We don't have the funds. We don't have the resources. Secondly, when interest rates like that climb, there could be a point where the United States' credibility will be questioned. And people will wonder whether they ought to buy our bonds because they're concerned about whether our economy is going to remain strong. And if we're running that kind of debt, if we don't have any kind of fiscal reform, then that sends a signal that ultimately this is going to be a crisis that is going to undermine our economy. That's the danger here, that ultimately it will undermine our economy. And besides that, two areas that are extremely important to the American people, Social Security, Medicare, both of them in 7 years are going to go bankrupt. They're going to go bankrupt. Is Congress doing anything about that? Is the president doing anything about that? No. They're ignoring it. So again, it's governing by crisis. And when you do that, ultimately, it's going to hurt our credibility in the world. The dollar is crashing right now. And it's crashing for a lot of reasons, the war in Iran, and what's happening with fuel prices, what's happening with our economy. Look, I've always felt America is strong, but I also realize that if we don't have strong leadership willing to make tough decisions, then it's a matter of time before our economy could collapse as well. Yeah. So we're at a dangerous point right now. And as I said in my remarks, what is lacking is strong leadership, because nobody wants to stand up and make the tough decisions. What areas of spending can we cut back on and tighten up on? We've got entitlements that are 2/3 of our budget right now. Nobody wants to touch the entitlements. We're talking about having to raise additional revenues. When we put together our agreement, we included all of those areas. Everything was on the table. And that's what they've got to do again. I'm not sure that leadership is going to be willing to take these issues on. But I do know one thing: if leadership is not there, crisis will be.
Can you imagine any conceivable political coalition accomplishing what you were able to accomplish during the Clinton years and putting the country back on a path to fiscal stability? Or is it going to take a crisis to produce that political coalition?
Well, I would love to see that kind of coalition come together. There are members of both parties who care about this issue. We're working with them on co-chair of a group called the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which keeps arguing how dangerous it is to not deal with our fiscal irresponsibility. And so, there are those that want to deal with it. I think, as always, I'm not sure that there's enough leadership right now, because you need to have the president, you need to have the leadership in the Congress be willing to support action in this area. I had that when I was chair of the Budget Committee, when I was director of OMB. I had the support of both Republicans and Democrats. I had Bob Dole supporting strong fiscal action. I had George Mitchell supporting strong fiscal action. But that's not there right now. So I think the only thing I think that could happen is that they have at least the strength to appoint a commission made up of responsible people from both parties, made up of business leaders and others, who have the responsibility to present a plan to the country about how do we act to be able to bring down that debt, bring down that deficit, probably on a 10-year path of some kind, because we can't do it all at once, but at least establish a plan for how we can get there. But I have to tell you right now, I just don't see the leadership there that's willing to really make some very difficult decisions on fiscal responsibility. It's unfortunate, but I think what I'm saying is the truth.
Yeah, I hear it. I'm a historian who has studied the decline of other empires, and the picture that you present is not so different from the British Empire in the aftermath of the First World War. It was an empire that bankrupted itself and that propelled its decline and ruin. But what I would like to push you on, since we have a lot of audience interest in the local economy, is the relationship, perhaps the paradoxical relationship between sort of the picture of success and dynamism that you encounter in the regional economy and the impending fiscal crisis that you describe. I think Governor Newsom recently boasted, and at some level was right to boast, that California's growth has been spectacular. I think since 2019, our state's GDP has grown by 40%. Given such success, which is being driven by the technology sector, does it become more challenging for voters and their elected representatives to take seriously the necessity for the kind of fiscal reckoning that you describe?
Uh, you know, I I I think that the failure of leaders to kind of describe what I just went through about the dangers of running this level of debt and what it could do to our economy, that they're in a difficult position because the market's doing well and technology is doing well, and as you pointed out, GDP is doing well, and everybody basically thinks that's great. I kind of looked at Wall Street, and because of what's happening with Straits of Hormuz, because of what's happening with fuel prices, because of what's happening, I mean, the IMF basically said if this continues, we're going to have a worldwide recession, and everybody, understands. I mean, my God, here in California, what we're approaching $7 a gallon gasoline, for God's sake, and yet if the president says a few words like, oh, maybe in a couple of days we'll have an agreement with Iran, which never turns out to be true. The algorithms that operate on Wall Street basically say, oh, this is good news, and the market goes up, when in fact it ought to be concerned about what's happening. And I think that's true for California. I mean, I think, you can always look at the rosy side and, and look, we are productive and technology is good and people are working. And I understand all of that. But everybody in business, and you have a lot of people in business, you don't operate with 100% debt level like the federal government is operating. I mean, the percentage of debt to GDP is over 100% right now. And you know damn well when you get in that much debt that it's going to be trouble, and you're ultimately going to have to go bankrupt. And so it's a basic sense that yes, we have some good things happening in our economy. We are brilliant. We're innovative. We're creative. But we also have to exercise fiscal responsibility. When Bill Clinton made the decision to do another $500 billion in deficit reduction, I remember Clinton said something like, "It's probably going to cost me the next election," and people like Bob Rubin said, "No, it's not, because you're going to send a signal to the financial markets that we're implementing good fiscal discipline, and ultimately it's going to come back to be a reward for you in terms of the economy." I'm not sure Clinton really believed that, but he did the right thing, and it did work. It came back, and we had a very strong economy because of what we were doing. We had a balanced budget, for God's sakes. And so it's going to take that kind of leadership. And I've spoken to the assembly in Sacramento. And I told them, I said, look, you're dealing with a debt. You got some real problems here in California. You can't just try to get by or play with the numbers, play with the estimates. I mean, I've been through that. You can play all kinds of games with estimates. I said, you've got to put everything on the table, and you're going to have to make some tough decisions if you're going to exercise leadership, and if we're going to be able to have California have a responsible budget for the future. And that's the same message I think I'm sending to everybody is, look, you've got to be fiscally responsible, whether you're in business or whether you're in government. You got to do the right thing. And yeah, it's tough. It's not easy. When we voted on those budget agreements to raise taxes, to implement some cost controls on entitlements, to reduce farm price support programs, to reduce veterans' benefits, that's tough. That's a tough vote. But Republicans and Democrats, because it was bipartisan, stood up together and passed it. It was the right vote and right for the country. We've got to get back to that. We've got to get back to that. And, ultimately, if it doesn't happen, then crisis will happen, mark my words. And then we'll have to respond at a time when, frankly, we will not have the resources to be able, as we did in 2008, to get us through a crisis.
Oh, thank you. It's a really profound and troubling proposition. As we sort of move towards that conclusion, I wonder if I could push you to speak about the foundations of leadership. I was really struck reading your memoir by your moving description of the relationship, the complex, fraught relationship between faith and leadership. The prologue to your memoir, for me as a reader, powerfully recalled Reinhold Niebuhr. In a fallen world, you argue, leaders must be willing to accept even the burdens of sin in the service of their country. It's a very powerful, striking argument. You have written about the creative tension between faith and public leadership from a place of deep and serious engagement with both. How do you think the state of religion, and perhaps especially the state of Christianity in American society today, prepares us for the burdens of leadership in perilous times?
Well, I'm a believer in faith. I was raised as a Catholic, and I remain an active Catholic. And my faith has always been very important to me, in be able to give me the strength that I needed at some tough times in my career. That you talked about the Office for Civil Rights,
Yeah.
making the decision to stick to my job, and then getting fired as a result of it was not easy. But in many ways, my faith gave me the support because I think in the end, I felt like I was doing morally the right thing, in trying to help young kids be able to achieve equal education. Uh, and so I think faith is important, but I also believe in what our forefathers uh, stated very clearly, that we have to respect freedom of religion.
Mhm.
And everybody has to be able to approach faith in their own way. It's in my book, it's a very private matter. I've never felt that my faith ought to be used as a political weapon in any way. I mean, the way you see it being used these days. I think that's wrong. I think our faith has to be private, and it has to be between ourselves and God. Uh, and ultimately, for me, it was, my ability. I can remember when we were doing the Bin Laden raid, which was, a very risky operation. So we sending two teams of SEALs 150 miles into Pakistan at night to go after what we hoped was Bin Laden. Uh, and I can remember, I was head of that operation back at the CIA. And even to this day, I carry a rosary around. And I was reaching for that rosary and saying Hail Marys, because in many ways it just helped me have the strength to be able to say, we got to get through this. We got to get through this. So it's something that I think is deeply private. I think everybody, I think faith is that kind of strength that you sometimes we all have to turn to some strength from a God out there, no matter how we believe that God exists. But the ability to have that kind of support is what gets us through life. And I just I just would hope that politicians would not use it as a club
Mhm.
to try to either embrace one's faith or another faith, or say this one's better than others, etc. Uh, just allow people to be able to exercise their faith in the best way possible, which is between the individual and God.
That's right. And I think what you describe is exactly the understanding of faith and its relationship to leadership that our greatest 20th century leaders, say Franklin Roosevelt, exemplified in their convictions and in their conduct. I wonder if I might ask you one final question in the hope that I can give you an opportunity to offer us a more optimistic view of the future. Continuing this theme on faith and politics, in recent months, we've witnessed a startling war of words between the American president and the first American pope. I don't think any of us ever expected to see a president of the United States tweet AI generated images of himself in sacred imagery. But Pope Leo is very likely going to be pontiff for many years after Trump has left the political scene. How do you think an American pope will shape this country's engagement with world order in the decades to come?
Well, we're living at a very unique time where we're living on one hand in the Trump era with Trump as president, with uh, all of the kind of you know words that sometimes I think really undermine the moral order that we need in our country. And he also walks away from the rule of law. Oftentimes, he doesn't really believe in the rule of law or in the truth. In the truth, um, and he's made his decision with regards to the war in Iran. The fact is that you know the the Pope represents moral authority in the world and represents the importance of trying to achieve peace wherever it's at in the world, whether it's in Iran or whether it's in Ukraine or whether it's in Africa, wherever he's been. His message has been very consistent about advocating peace, and I think that's the kind of message that popes need to send, because they are a moral authority that has to try to speak to the world about what's important in terms of maintaining not just the peace, but maintaining the dignity of human beings everywhere. And I just think when Trump tries to take on the Pope and then accuses the Pope of wanting Iran to have a nuclear weapon, which is not something the Pope has said, he because he's used to, if anybody goes after him in politics, he basically goes after that person and tries to destroy them. And in some ways, that's what he's trying to do with the Pope. But it's just, the president has to understand that it makes him look very cheap by doing that. It makes him look vindictive. It makes him look like he can't handle life in the world we live in. And look, all of us go through trying times. All of us don't like to hear people be critical of whatever we do. But you know what? We stick to it. And we don't get wrapped up in trying to destroy our enemies. We have to get wrapped up in trying to achieve what we want to achieve. And I think that's what Trump ought to be doing. Just run the country. Do what he should do as president. Make our country better. That's what he needs to do. Not take on the Pope, not take on and go after political enemies and try to destroy them. Because, when you do that, you destroy yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's what he's doing. He's got to be bigger than that.
Thank you. That's a powerful, powerful answer. And of course, it takes us right back to our point of departure, which is the leadership that you exhibited at the Office for Civil Rights. Our leadership in the world depends upon our faithfulness to our moral values and to the rule of law. I think that has us out of time, so I should turn this back over to Mark. But thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Secretary Panetta, Dr. Sargent, for taking the time today and the thoughtful conversation. I saw someone in the chat say Panetta for president. While the East Bay Leadership Council does not endorse candidates, if you do announce your run for president at any point, I hope that you will give us a call and we can be a part of that campaign launch. We are certainly a country in crisis, and that crisis extends to all corners of our economy and community.
Yeah.
Made that clear. So,
Mark, if I could just say one thing, at that poll I talked about for young people, and we're going to be announcing this within a couple of weeks, but like a lot of us, I think about almost over 80%, 83%, 89% said that the country was headed in the wrong direction. But at the same time, when we asked them about our democracy, and they expressed the feeling that we still have the tools to save our democracy if we're involved in our democracy, if we're involved at the community level, if we're involved in trying to help one another. And it was a very interesting message because I guess it's what we all feel. We feel a lot, despondent about sometimes where the country's going. But at the same time, we also know that our country has a history where we've been able to respond because we are resilient, because we have great spirit, and because we want to do the right thing. So I just think that's a message of hope for all of us, that at least the younger generations understand that, one way or the other, no matter what we're going through, that ultimately our democracy will survive.
Well, thank you, Secretary. Hope is always helpful, and we are certainly hopeless optimists at the East Bay Leadership Council, and grateful for your leadership in more ways than one. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. If your employer is not a member of the East Bay Leadership Council, we'd love to welcome you. Reach out, learn more, get involved. EastBayLeadershipCouncil.com. Take care, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you, everybody.
Take care.